Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well. Middle of the night, early morning bonus time. Before we get into it, though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. The merch is displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. Finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost you a cent. Click that like button. It takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things, they really do help this channel to continue to grow and go, and they definitely matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to tonight's middle of the night bonus, early morning, whatever you want to call it, shall we? Now, like I said a long time ago, for those of you that have been with the channel, I have been fascinated with the unknown since I was a little boy. The Time Life book from the 80s, the commercial, read the book. My mom got me that book. I was obsessed with that book. I was obsessed with UFOs, with Bigfoot. I was obsessed with science, with dinosaurs, whatever. And I wanted answers to things that I couldn't answer. I remember my grandfather being very interested in things like this. And I remember a name. And it's always resonated with me when I think conspiracy, or I think occult, or science. And that would be Jack Parsons. Jack Parsons was a founding member of NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, JPL, with some crediting him as being the father of rocketry, and others joking that JPL was actually Jack Parsons' laboratory. But you won't find much about him in NASA's website. Parsons' legacy as an engineer and chemist has been somewhat overshadowed by his interest in the occult, and has led to what some critics describe as rewriting of history books. He's lived in the footnotes since his death. He's a forgotten figure, says biographer George Pendle, author of Strange Angel, The Otherworldly Life of rocket scientist John Whiteside Parsons, Jack's full name. George Pendle did a archaeological dig into Parsons' life after finding a mention of him in the science book. The more I dug, the more bizarre and extreme the story seemed. In short, Parsons played a critical role in the formation of rocket science and was instrumental in building the rockets that were eventually used in the space race. However, he also believed in magic, was involved in the early stages of Scientology, and had an extremely colorful sex life. For that reason, Pendle speculates Parsons was a figure who didn't fit into the mold of the industrial complex. Wernher von Braun, a former Nazi, was much easier fit than Parsons, says Pendle. A lot of people would be shocked to find out that the space program was founded by a man who held orgies in his Pasadena mansion. Early chemistry experiments. Parsons' interest in chemistry stemmed from his teenage years when, inspired by space travel found in science fiction literature, he started amateur rocket experiments with a school friend called Edward Foreman. He later studied chemistry in high school and took a holiday job at the Hercules Powder Company, where he got a handle in a wide range of explosives. After school, Parsons was keen to access the rocketry facilities at Caltech, but his academic ambitions had been plagued by financial difficulties. He and Foreman ended up teaming with a PhD student called Frank Molina to apply for funding for the university to explore rocketry. They didn't reveal their ambition to develop rockets for space exploration, as this was, at the time, considered science fiction. At the university's Guggenheim Aeronautical Laboratory, the trio collaborated on developing rockets in a creative and liberal environment as members of the GALCIT, or GALCIT, Rocket Research Group. The group was interested in numbers over the next few years, set about developing a static rocket motor before moving on to working rockets. The team became known as the Suicide Squad on campus because of how dangerous their experiments were, but eventually had success in building a static rocket that could burn for more than a minute. Esotericism. In the late 30s, Parsons started to develop an interest in esotericism, attending something called the Gnostic Mass at the Church of Thelema. Parsons came to believe in magic, a force that he felt could be explained through quantum physics, as espoused by Thelema's founder, Aleister Crowley. He was good with things that went boom, so fought with rockets and explosives, says Pendle. As Parsons' interest in the occult developed, his colleagues, Molina, approached the National Academy of Science for funding into jet propulsion as a means for developing more nimble aircraft. The team was granted $1,000, the first government-funded rocketry research group in history. A quarter of the funding had to go towards repairing damage to Caltech building caused by the group's experiments, and the group was eventually forced to relocate to some iron sheds in the Arroyo Seco Canyon, where they were closely watched by the FBI, which was keen to make sure that no political extremists were accessing the explosives. It was here that the Jet Propulsion Laboratory was founded. One of the group's key innovations was developing jet-assisted takeoff, or JATO, engines for U.S. Air Corps, with Parsons developing a restricted burning solid rocket fuel that was stable enough to be stored indefinitely. The engine technology and fuel were commercialized through a company called Aerojet, where Parsons became project manager. Versions of this fuel was eventually used by NASA in the space shuttle, as well as in military ballistic missiles. At the same time, 1941, Parsons started to have a sexual relation with his wife, Helen's 17-year-old sister, Sarah, something that was encouraged by his church. His wife started a relationship with one of the church's most senior members, Talbot Smith. The four of them, along with other Thelemites, ended up moving into a large home together in Pasadena. Drugs flowed freely, as did sexual partners. The lodge attracted negative attention, with the police and FBI receiving allegations that it played most to a cult involved in sexual orgies and black magic, although upon investigation it was deemed not to represent a threat to national security. The U.S. government heard that Nazi Germany was developing the V-2 rocket, and so gave the GALCIT Rocket Research Group, now without Parsons, a grant to develop rocket-based weapons, and the group was renamed the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. At around that time, Parsons was expelled from Aerojet by new majority shareholders who disapproved of his unorthodox and unsafe working methods. Parsons and Foreman moved on to found the Ad Astra Engineering Company. In 1975, science fiction writer and later founder of Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard, moved into the Pasadena Lodge. Sarah took an interest in Hubbard, which made Parsons jealous. He developed a deeper interest in witchcraft and the darker side of magic, becoming fascinated by poltergeists and ghostly apparitions. In a bid to conjure up a new lover, he took part in an extraordinary ritual where he would masturbate onto magical tablets to the sound of music. After his girlfriend ran off with Hubbard, he decided to create his own girlfriend and summon an elemental, explains Pendle. Poetry for his elemental. After one such ritual in 1946, Parsons decided he had managed to conjure up his perfect woman. So when he came into contact with Marjorie Cameron, he was convinced she was the one. He felt as though his elemental had arrived, said Pendle. Cameron had no idea that she had been invoked in this way. She became his muse and was the subject of a book of poetry Parsons wrote at the time. When you think about scientists, you don't think of them as necessarily being fun or having a creative side, but Parsons saw himself of being at the end of the line of the group of scientists, stretching back to Newton, who saw himself as a natural philosopher, explains Pendle. Newton wrote about alchemy. Poetry used to be part of what the scientist was. He was a Renaissance man with a whole swath of interest. When Parsons worked on his rocketry experiments in the desert, he would recite a pagan poem to Pan. Pendle doesn't see this as particularly strange, saying, "They were all young guys. It would have been like going into a huddle and shouting the name of your team." Parsons' financial fortune fell apart after he invested his life savings in co-founding a company with Hubbard and Sarah, his ex-girlfriend, and her current primary partner. Hubbard convinced Parsons he was going to buy yachts and resell them at a profit, but this never happened. Parsons lost the vast majority of his money into a scam. The company fell apart, and eventually Hubbard and Sarah went on to found Scientology together, shunned in the Cold War. Parsons remained a specialist in rocketry and was often called as an expert witness in police investigations involving explosives. He was good with things that went boom, so Alafat with rockets and explosives, said Pendle. As the Cold War set in, any academics suspected of being communist sympathizers were froze out. Parsons and many of his colleagues lost their security clearance, leaving him unemployed. He found himself earning money as a manual laborer, hospital orderly, and a car mechanic. Having been pushed out of science, Parsons became even more deeply entrenched in the occult. He ended up applying his skills to create pyrotechnics and explosives for the film industry. Just before a planned trip to Mexico in 1952, Parsons, who was 37, received a large order of explosives for a movie. While preparing the order, there was an explosion involving mercury in which Parsons suffered fatal wounds. Some of his friends suspected a state-sponsored conspiracy, although it was ruled an accident. Vulgar Press. To mark the centenary of Jack Parsons' birth in 1914, Vulgar Press is publishing a collection of Parsons' poems, songs for the witch woman, which he wrote about Marjorie Cameron. It proves an intimate glimpse into the final years of their relationship, which is cut short by his untimely death. Cameron provides the illustrations. In the poems, he's writing to what he saw as a magical creature, explains Pendle. Parsons uses imagery that is pretty far out, says Pendle, mentioning a vision of a girl and goat dancing together in a satanic ritual where the girl is more fearsome than the goat she's dancing with. This is how he saw his relationship with Cameron. She was the girl he had summoned, but he was also terrified of her. Many of the poems are about a hidden world beyond the view of normal mortals, Pendle says. Parsons had his rocketry as well as his normal life. He discovered other worlds by imagining going into a rocket to the moon. He wanted to explore his new frontier. He saw both space and magic as ways of exploring these new frontiers, one breaking free from Earth literally and metaphysically. In the end, it was Parsons' poetry and other interests that ended his career in rocketry. The government doesn't really want any people with quirkiness, says Pendle. with all of the rumors about the Pasadena Lodge, the magic, the chanting poems at rockets, he couldn't fit into the government job. In Pendle's view, Parson is the founding father of rocketry and should be recognized as such. The sentiment is echoed by a number of his colleagues, including Werner van Braun and Mulena, who felt as though his contributions to America space technology had been neglected. If you are looking for a conspiracy, it's not his death, it's why he's been wiped from history. There is much more room for mavericks now than there was in the 40s and 50s. He's not really mentioned in a tour of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. There's no mention of him as a founder, continues Pendle. He may be referenced briefly in the footnotes, but it's the occult side of his life that keeps his light burning, not the science. The so-called Babylon Working, conducted by John Whiteside Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard between January 4th and March 4th, 1946, has been the object of much speculation and wonder. The speculation is due to the part of the involvement in two charismatic and brilliant bohemians of the period. Parsons was a major force in the early development of solid fuel booster rockets, for which work the IAU eventually named the lunar crater in his memory. He was an OTO member from 1941 and served for a short period as the master of Agape Lodge OTO in 1940s. He died under mysterious circumstances in an explosion in 52. The other participant, Pulp Fiction author Lafayette Ron Hubbard, eventually founded the Church of Scientology and has been the center of stormy controversies in decades since. Both men were students of magic, especially the sex magic of Aleister Crowley. According to Bent Corridon, Hubbard once confided in his son, Ron Jr., secrets, techniques, and powers I alone have refined, improved on, applied my engineering principles to, science and logic, the keys, my keys to a doorway of magic, my magic, the power, not Scientology power, my power, the real powers of Solomon. Hubbard Sr. made clear he was talking about sex magic central to the OTO system, but with a unique twist. Sex by will, love by will, no caring and no sharing, no feelings. Sex is the route to power. Scarlet woman, they are the secret to the doorway. Use and consume, feast, drink the power through them, waste and discard them. The idealist Jack Parsons could hardly have understood what sort of man he was dealing with, he wrote Crowley in February of 46. About 3 months ago, I met Ron. He is a gentleman. He moved in with me about 2 months ago. And although Maggie and I are still friendly, she has transferred her sexual affections to Ron. While Parsons was convinced that Hubbard, as he wrote Crowley, is in complete accord with their own principles and proceeded to enter into a joint financial venture with the future father of Scientology, Crowley was writing his eventual successor as the OTO Grand Master, Carl Germer. From our brother's account, he has given away both his girls and his money. Apparently, it's the ordinary confidence trick, Parsons' friend, Alva Rogers, who witnessed these events as they unfolded, described Hubbard's role in this way. Ron was a persuasive and unscrupulous charmer, not only in social groups but with the ladies. He was so persuasive and charmingly unscrupulous that within a matter of a few weeks he brought the entire house of Parsons down around poor Jack's ears. He did this by the simple expedition of taking over Jack's girl for extended periods of time. Note, when acquired an interesting little bit of related information the other day from the hand of someone with the curiosity, Valine vibe, in regards to a footnote mentioned in 1962's Dark Horse article by the late and much admired Alva Rogers, found in another Parsons article, we had recently posted, the mysterious researcher noted, it might be worth pointing out that he has another tangential Hubbard connection as the author of the Requiem for the Unknown, a book on fantasy. It was against this background that Parsons and Hubbard embarked on the Babylon Working, an elaborate sex magic experiment designed to bring Babylon into physical manifestation. The whole concept of the magical child has several distinct interpretations. In the more orthodox and traditional view, sex magic is employed to manifest, by an act of pure will, a magical being, the material basis of which the sexual fluids themselves. A more literal interpretation holds that magical rituals such as the star sapphire will produce a moon child. That is, a living child who serves as a host to the super being. That is, the child is an avatar in the Eastern terms, or an incarnation of the divine in Western thought. Yet a third interpretation is that sex magic is simply the yoga of sex, and the magical child is the transformed sex magician himself. Hubbard and Parsons were aiming at the second literal interpretation, to manifest a scarlet woman willing to conceive a child who would embody a transformative goddess being Babylon. Crowley wrote Grimmer. Apparently Parsons or Hubbard or somebody is producing a moonchild. I get fairly frantic when I contemplate the idiocy of these loots. The recreation was certainly excessive. Crowley's successor of the Grand Master of the OTO in the 80s, Betta, noted that the adequate chronicle of Parsons' now famous Babylon Working of 1946 EV has yet to be published. Most published accounts focus on his friendship and falling out with the Church of Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard, without appraising the larger issues of what was actually being attempted and why. Certainly, Parsons' own description of the working is based on fundamentals of ceremonial sex magic. In the Book of Babylon, January 4th through March 4th, 1946, E.V. Parsons outlines the entire experiment, including the reasons for it. The present age is under the influence of a force called, in magical terms, Horus. This force relates to fire, Mars, and the sun, that is, to power, violence, and energy. This force is completely blind, depending upon men and women in whom it manifests and who will guide it. A catastrophic trend is due to our lack of understanding of our own natures, the hidden lusts, fears, and hatreds resulting in the warping of love urge, which underlie the natures of all Western people, and take in a homicidal and suicidal direction. This impasse is broken by the incarnation of another sort of force called Babylon. The nature of this force relates to love, understanding, freedom, and is the necessary counterbalance or correspondence to the manifestation of Horus. Thus far, Parsons is reasoning in a sound manner. Keep in mind, however, that he is working with his friend Hubbard. Then, in the very process of making off with Parsons' money and lover, a man who was to tell his son Ron Jr. a few years later to use and discard scarlet women. In what sense scarlet? The younger Hubbard asked. Scarlet, the Scientology source replied. The blood of our bodies, the blood of our souls. Bend their bodies, bend their minds, bend their wills. Beat back the past. Note, in the disturbing public domain essay, Hollywood, Satanism, Scientology, and Suicide, Hubbard's heinous abuses of the fairer sex, as described in his own son. In my father's private circle, Ron Jr. explains, there were lots of mistresses. When I was younger, I participated in a private orgy with him and 3 or 4 other women. His theory was that one has to open or crack a woman's soul in order for a satanic power to pour through it and into him. It got kind of far out, accumulating in a variety of sex acts. Dad also had an incredible violent temper. He was into S&M and would beat his mistress and shoot them full of drugs. When asked by an interviewer how this soul cracking worked, L. Ron Hubbard Jr. said, "The explanation is sort of long and complicated. The basic rationale is that there are some powers in this universe that are pretty strong. As an example, Hitler was involved in the same black magic and same occult practices that my father was, the identical ones which, as I have said, stem clear back to before Egyptian times. It's a very secret thing, very powerful, very workable, and very dangerous. Brainwashing is nothing compared to it. Proper term would be soul cracking. It's like cracking open the soul, which then opens various doors to the powers that exist, the satanic and demonic powers, simply put. It's like a tunnel or an avenue or a doorway. Pulling that power into yourself through another person, and using women especially, is incredibly insidious. It makes Dr. Fu Manchu look like a kindergarten student. It's ultimate vampirism, the ultimate mind screw. Instead of going for blood, you're going for their soul. And you take drugs in order to reach that state where you can, quite literally, like a psychic hammer, break their soul and pull the power through. This is a distortion of Crowley's teaching, the latter observed in the same context. We do opine that is better and easier, that the other party should be in ignorance of the sacred character of the office. It is enough if the assistant be formed by nature significantly for the physical task, robust, vigorous, eager, sensible, hot, and healthy, flesh, nerve, blood, being tense, quick, lively, easily inflamed, nigh extinguishable. Crowley suggests that the partner in sex magic should, ideally, in his opinion, be involved for the sake of sensual pleasure, pure and simple. Hubbard, on the other hand, is telling his own son how to enslave minds, bodies, and souls. Parson, who wrote extensively on the subject of freedom, must have had no idea what type of person he was engaged in high magic with. In any case, Parson goes to narrate that, in January 1946, I had been engaging in the study and practice of magic for 7 years, and in the supervision and operation of the occult lodge for 4 years, having been initiated into the sanctuary of the Gnosis by the B666. At this time, I decided upon a magical operation designed to obtain the subsistence of the elemental mate. In a sense, deprived of his former lover Parsons, was going for broke and looking for a partner to create a magical child with, all or nothing. I have no other terms, as he put it to Crowley. This is where things get crazy, all right? One of the big controversies or conspiracies is that L. Ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons, their moonchild was Hillary Clinton, and she is Horus, or the walking embodiment of evil, which I guess, if you look at it the right way, you might you might see it. Anyway, beginning on January 4th, well, also Hillary was born in October of 47, so beginning on January 4th, 1946 at 9 p.m., Parsons and Hubbard employed a powerful Enochian air tablet using an air dagger, parchment talisman, invocations, conjurations, Enochi calls, and invocations, and appropriate banishings, according to Parsons. At various times over subsequent days, windstorms were raised, electrical power was disrupted, January 14th, during which Hubbard alleged that a candle knocked from his hand by something Several witnesses saw a brownish yellow light about 7 feet high, which Parsons banished. On January 18th, Parsons and Hubbard were out in the Mojave Desert when Parsons suddenly had an realization the experiment was accomplished. I returned home, he tells us, and found a young woman answering the requirements waiting for me. For the next month, he invoked Babylon with her as his partner, as was proper to one of my grade. In other words, the sexual Eucharist of the Mass of the Holy Ghost. While his magic partner visited in New York on February 28th, Parsons returned to the Mojave and received a communication he referred to as Liber 49, the Book of Babylon, which identifies its source as Babylon herself. It should be noted that Hubbard was also away then. This is where things get real weird. Liber 49 asserts, among other things, the working is of 9 moons, and she shall wander in the witch wood under the night of Pan, and know the mysteries of the goat and serpent, and of the children that are hidden away. I will provide the place and the material basis, though the tears and blood, thy tears, thy sweat, thy blood, thy semen, thy love, thy faithful, shall provide. Ah, I shall drain thee like a cup that is of me, Babylon. Let me behold thee naked and lusting after me, calling upon my name. Let me receive all thy manhood within my cup, climax upon climax, joy upon joy. Gather together in the covens of the old, gather together in the secret, be naked and shameless, and rejoice in my name. It is interesting that much of this anticipates the emergence of Wicca at the time when Gerald Gardner in England was only beginning to formulate his ideas. Parsons spent much of the remainder of his short magical career writing on the subject of witchcraft. In any event, when Parsons communicated the good news to Crawley, the old magus was perplexed or amused, or conceivably both. He wrote Parsons, "You have me completely puzzled by your remarks. I thought I had a morbid imagination as good as any man's, but it seems I have not. I can't form the slightest idea what you can possibly mean." Apparently undaunted, upon Hubbard's return, Parsons prepared to impregnate his magical partner, impressed by a vision Hubbard had of a savage and beautiful woman riding naked on a great cat-like beast. According to Francis King account, Parsons was high priest and had intercourse with a girl, while Hubbard, who was present, acted as seer or clairvoyant. This occurred on the first 3 days of March 1946. The aftermath of this subject is much rumor and points out the high significance of sex magic. "This secret is the true key to magic," said Crawley. "That is, by the right use of this secret, man may impose his will on nature herself." Hubbard took off with Parsons' former partner and his funds. Parsons caught up with Hubbard in July of 1946 in Miami, having to invoke Barzabel to raise a storm at sea, forcing Hubbard back to shore. Ron Hubbard, nevertheless, married Parsons' former lover the following month and went to write Dianetics, the Science of Mental Health, and eventually to organize the Church of Scientology, built upon the hidden mythos of 75-million-year-old disaster in which the inhabitants of 76-planet Galactic Federation were blown up by a dictator named Xenu. This science fiction space opera from Hubbard's Pulp Fiction days forms a bizarre underpinning to an already bizarre story. The remainder of the tale depends entirely on whom you talk to. Was the magical child conceived ritually in 1946, March 4th, born into this world as Babylon incarnate on or about 9 moons later, on or about December 4th, 1946? Is such a being a woman of about 50 alive today. Well, no, not 50. She would be like 73 or 4. Or is there more ethereal birth, perhaps, on a spiritual level, a true birthday of Wicca and its various descendant bodies? Surely the timing of the Babylon working and the arrival of post-war baby boom is simultaneous in an eerie sort of way. UFO buffs have of late been toting the theory that Hubbard came to Parsons with a purpose more grandiose than the ordinary confidence game. In pulp fiction, in pulp magazine circles, he had encountered any number of occultists and border occultists. Talbot Mundy, Colonel Arthur Burks, Major Donald Keyhole, Ray Palmer, Richard Shaver come to mind, and had already formulated the core of the inner Scientology teaching outlined above. He wished to bring this other world into manifestation, but lacked the technical knowledge to do so. So he came to the innocent sex magician Jack Parsons. In this version, the Babylon working, guided by Hubbard, had little to do with the Babylon, and more to do with the hideous old ones of H.P. Lovecraft. Open a door, something came through, is the essence of the thesis, and the appearance of the first flying saucer case the following year is considered, in this rumor, not coincidental at all. The Babylon working permanently alienated Parsons from Crawley, but the work of the ill-fated rocket scientist has more recently been re-evaluated in a more favorable light by present-day occultists and UFOologists alike. Crazy, crazy stuff right there. Man, oh man. And, Parsons' project or company that he founded is still up and running. Actually, the abandoned plant that's in Florida is a hotspot for satanic practices and stuff like that. Crazy. Anyway, guys, with that being said, stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant. Your support is what makes this channel so special. God bless you all.